Hello, BookTube. I went out first thing this morning. Dodgy kind of day, heavy clouds alternating with bright sunlight. Kind of day where you're not really sure that the next hour won't have rain. And it's just been like that all. It was like that all morning. It was like that all of the middle of the day. But I went out. I had errands to run, a couple of them, and one of the things that I wanted to do while running errands was field test a new shoulder bag and see what it's like out in the wild. You'll have a full report on that on Bag Tuesday. But as you can guess, since I was outside and had pants on, I went to the Brattle Bookshop and had a wonderful time. I didn't have a whole lot of time to spend. I wish that I did, but I still found a pile of books, and this pile is almost 10 books, and this is what it looks like after I've taken out all the stuff that I can't talk about because I got stuff for other people that I don't want to spoil on camera. And I thought we'd go through these. Some of them will be familiar. I'm as usual when I'm shopping at the Brattle. Everything there is so cheap, especially there's a sale lot outside the store where everything is $1, $3, or $5. When things are that cheap, you can just hoover stuff up on the hope that you will find stuff you really like, stuff you really want to keep. It's not like in other used bookstores that I have visited where the prices are such that I am agonizing. I'm weighing pros and cons. Generally speaking, when I'm out in the sale lot, if I want something, if my first impulse is I want this, I just grab it, and I'll sort it out later. Because the price is so low, I'll just grab it. But the goal is always to find so-called keepers, right? In any place, in any used bookstore, in any new bookstore, the acquiring of any kind of book is always designed to find keepers. That's even true of the stuff that I get from publishers in the mail. So I don't know how many of these will be. Some of these are rebuys, so it'll be a question. I will reread them because, as a number of you have pointed out, I do use the Brattle as a kind of slow-motion for-pay library. Instead of going to the library and browsing the books there, I browse the books at the Brattle, buy them, and read them at my leisure. And then, if I don't want them, then I can get rid of them at the back end of that process. But some of these, I'm sure, will be keepers. We shall see. The first two are mass market paperbacks. It's a lot easier for a mass market paperback to be a keeper because unless you're out of control and they pile up really quick, their storage is much easier. So I found an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel that I haven't read in forever. Just forever. And I don't think I've ever seen this paperback. This is The Efficiency Expert, which is set in... This is not a fantasy novel or a science fiction novel at all. This is just about a perennial loser who can't seem to find the right kind of job. And he takes a job as a so-called efficiency expert for a company, even though he's not qualified for it, and immediately finds out that there's something wrong going on at the company. We're supposed to believe that he is a stand-up guy, regardless of whether or not employers see that. And this came out, I forget when this first appeared. It had, as a book, it originally had a Frank Frazetta cover. This is not the Frank Frazetta cover, but it's an homage to the Frank Frazetta cover, which is the Frazetta cover, the original cover of this thing, if I remember correctly, was the exact same scene, only from a different angle. Does this tell me who does the cover? No, it does not. But I haven't read this in eons. And, definitely worth it for $1. Most of these things were $1. I found also this in perfect condition, The Captains and the Kings by Taylor Caldwell, whose name is now completely forgotten. Once upon a time, she was an immensely best-selling author. And this was a real big hit. This was right up there with the most popular things that she ever did. This came out in the 70s, I think, so it was late in her publishing career, but it's a multi-generational saga, a poor boy who comes to America from Ireland with nothing but the clothes he stands up in, and eventually founds a gigantic dynasty. It has the classic, early 80s cover. When did this come out? I'm curious to know. 1972, okay, so this is a 70s cover. Although this cover probably came out in the early 80s. Well, anyway, it's a Kennedy-esque story because the goal is to get Roman Catholic in the White House. Then we have this little hardcover. I have had this so many times. I've had so many copies of this. The minute I saw it at the Brattle, I realized I don't currently have a copy, and I might want to reread it. I probably will. At least the trap I fall into with this particular book is to reread only one part of it. This is Dead Certainties by Simon Schama. A cute little book that has appropriate illustrations all throughout, including it's a weird thing. It's not a grand narrative. It's three separate pieces that are interconnected. The first piece is on General Wolfe, who died on the Plains of Abraham, and is the subject of a famous painting, The Death of General Wolfe. And that is given here as a foldout in the book. And then the second part, the part that I tend to reread when I go back to this book, is the mysterious murder of George Parkman, who was murdered in 19th century Boston, and was the essay there. Basically, it's a long historical essay that Schama gives it, unearthing that crime, exploring the details. It was cause célèbre. It was all over the headlines. That part of this book, let's see what he calls it. Oh, this is signed. Neat. What does he call it? The Death of a Harvard Man. Is just fantastic. But I grabbed this anyway because it's in perfect condition, and I never see it that way. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that when I revisit this book, as I have a few times, I always go back to The Death of a Harvard Man and usually skip the other two sections. I won't do that this time. In fact, I'll go back to the General Wolfe part. Of course, General Wolfe. The Death of General Wolfe was made famous by a relative of the Parkman who dies in Death of a Harvard Man. Francis Parkman wrote the great account of Wolfe on the Plains of Abraham. Then we have two penguins. One is this olive green spined penguins, these old olive green spined penguins. I really liked the editorial team behind this group. I forget, Penguin 20th Century Classics was the name of this run. And I really liked the editorial team that they had about 40 years ago. I really liked the way the books came out. I liked the design team. Once upon a time, I could kick myself that I don't have it anymore. Once upon a time, I had the big Penguin 20th Century Classics trade paperback of Joseph and His Brothers by Thomas Mann, and I've never seen it again. I had the big fat trade paperback of it. I also had a big fat trade paperback of USA by John Dos Passos. But I had that Joseph and His Brothers, and my dogs destroyed it. And I couldn't get mad at them. For a second, I was mad at them. And then I just stood there watching how much fun they were having. And after that, I really couldn't be mad at them. And I've never, at the time, long before a lot of you were born, long before there was an internet, I watched them destroying that thing, and I thought at the time, the Brattle will provide. I will see another copy of that. And in all that time, I have not. But I found a Penguin 20th Century Classic in that edition here of Exiles Return by Malcolm Cowley. I'm always and forever on this channel praising the old Viking Portable Library series for how good they are, how genuinely really solid they are as reading experiences. Malcolm Cowley is more than anyone the man responsible for that. But this is his sort of memoir of the lost generation years where he was on the left bank in Paris and hobnobbing with John Dos Passos and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Gloria Steinem, I'm blanking on the name of the woman who actually coined the phrase "the lost generation." I want to say Gloria Steinem, but it wasn't Gloria Steinem, who would have had nothing to do with all these navel gazing losers. Gertrude Stein. I tell you, once you're 28, the brain starts to go. But this is really, really well done. Cowley's, I think, if he has a reputation now, if his posthumous reputation has survived this long into the 21st century, I'm not sure that it has, except among very bookish people. But if it has, it survived on the strength of his editorial interventions. He made the careers of most of the names that you would reflexively think of as 20th century American literature. He basically made the career of good 2/3 of those figures. And I think he's mostly remembered for that, but this is a really good book. I haven't reread it in forever. I probably had this copy when I first reread it. When did this edition come out? I wonder. 1990s, it looks like. But this has been around for almost 100 years, and it's really fun. It's really enjoyable to read. It's even more enjoyable the more you know about the behind the scenes stuff, because the world of literature owes a lot to Malcolm Cowley, not just for all of the authors that I hate that he made into household names, but also for all of his editorial interventions. The Viking Portable Library series was only the most visible. It was far from the only thing that he did. He was an unbelievably influential and important literary figure in the American Republic of Letters in the 20th century. I don't want to take that away from him at all, but he was not a nice guy at all. He was a wheedling, self-pitying poser, a climber, a parasite. He was all about Eve. And virtually every literary figure that dealt with him actually thought that about him and kept it from him. Because he as the years grew on, he grew in power and influence. It's going to be fun to read this again. I wonder if this is the edition that has... Yeah, this has an introduction by Donald Faulkner. Which is only fitting. Then for this BookTube goes to the Brattle with me, as always. BookTube always goes to the Brattle with me. That is, you could see that definitely by the books for BookTubers that I bought today, if I were showing them to you. But also BookTube events. This is the 1st of May. May is, among other things, Horror Mayhem, a BookTube event designated for shorter horror fiction. Although even that's not carved in stone. If you feel like reading a massive doorstop of horror, go right ahead. It was created last year by the Bookish Bryants, and they are with us in spirit, or maybe phantasm, in 2023. We still have a roster of co-hosts. I'm one of them, but the Bookish Bryants, I don't think, will be making videos about Horror Mayhem, but a lot of other people will be. And it's a tricky event for me to participate. I would participate in it anyway, even if I weren't a co-host. It's a tricky thing for me to do because, over the years I've made it pretty clear on this channel that horror as a genre and I don't get along. And I have been, a number of you have been very patient about that and said, well, you don't seem to like Lovecraft, and he would be the first person that I would otherwise recommend. But you don't seem to like him. That's true. I don't. I also don't like Stephen King. So the two biggest names in the horror genre, and I don't like either one of them. For what I think are very grounded reasons. But a number of you over the years have pointed out that my dislike of those two titans might be informing my dislike of the rest of the genre unfairly. And another name has come up over and over again as a recommendation. An author that I have read, I've read a huge amount of this author, but BookTube changes the way you read. At least the way I do. I watch all these channels, dozens and dozens and dozens of channels every single day, of people. Some of them think I'm Satan incarnate, wouldn't have anything to do with me, badmouth me in the comment sections of other videos. I don't care. Still watch the videos. Some of them don't know that any of their viewers exist. They have hundreds of thousands of subscribers and would sick a lawyer on you if you approached them in the street and said, I love your channel. And some of them are people who I've come to feel like I know them. I've never met them. I've never voxered with them in private, but I've come to feel that I know them, but I know for sure that their reading tastes don't coincide with mine at all. Not in the slightest. And yet, somebody lets you into their thoughts like that every week, every 2 times a week, every other week. The weird standoffish video making schedule that the rest of you have. When somebody does that, much less every day, it's going to affect me. I would like to think, I pray to whatever gods may be, that I never reached the point where that sort of input would not affect me. That my opinions were so stiff and so codified that they weren't open to any kind of amelioration, even when it's not intentional, when it's not aimed at me. These people aren't trying to convince me of anything. I'm just watching their videos. It was a long, roundabout way of saying I found a Penguin Classic. I always like to get a Penguin Classic at the Brattle if I can. I found a Penguin Classic of that author, the one who's not Lovecraft and the one who's not Stephen King. And that is Algernon Blackwood. I found this lovely Penguin trade paperback of Algernon Blackwood, Ancient Sorceries and Other Weird Stories. I've probably read everything in here, but this is a Penguin Classic. Who has the Who has the introduction here? Who does the honors for the introduction? S.T. Joshi. Okay, a great editor. Knows this author and a bunch of other authors, especially H.P. Lovecraft, backwards and forwards. So that's fantastic. Oh, that's great. Okay, so the introduction here will be worth the $1 I paid for the book anyway. But then for Horror Mayhem, I am going to try this author again, with the added weight of BookTube. BookTube just working on me day by day. Although sometimes not. I watched the Brothers Gwynn this morning. One of the Brothers Gwynn made a video just proposing marriage to Cormac McCarthy. I wondering if he's the greatest of all time, the GOAT. Unless those letters stand for something very different, he's not. But even in a case like that, I'm watching the video. On the one hand, I'm saying, all right, well, this is not a case of me being closed-minded. I have given this author a literal career's worth of second chances. I have hunkered down with this author on line-by-line level, and it's junk. It's complete junk. It has pulled the wool over an entire generation of readers, partly because of an ill-advised quip by Harold Bloom, and partly because it's the same allure as so-called modern art. The My Kid Could Do That allure of modern art. You look at a Cormac McCarthy novel, and the very first thing you think, if you're a dude bro, is, I could do that. Anyway, I always want to, when I hear hymns of praise to this garbage author, I always want to gently move the dude bro in question to someone who is doing all of the gimmicks of Cormac McCarthy, but is doing them well. Is someone who has the gimmicks. This is apparently the gimmicks are a draw, but who's doing them well. Whether it's William Gaddis or the primary thing that I would use would be James Ellroy. If you're reading, I don't even know. I think Edward Gwynn was going on about Sooty, but it could be anything. It could be anything, really. They love all of Cormac McCarthy over in the Brothers Gwynn land. It's always weird to me because their own father is a better writer in every measurable metric than Cormac McCarthy. They're singing the praises of. But when I see somebody praising the work of this charlatan, I always want to nudge them towards, for instance, James Ellroy. For instance, if you're loving these pieces of crack by Cormac McCarthy, then why don't you read The Cold 6000 and see what you think? Or if you can do without the gimmicks, if you could do with fewer of the gimmicks, read Don Winslow. You don't have to be going to James Ellroy. You can read Don Winslow and see what that exact kind of stuff is done like when it's done well. But anyway, these things, they always affect me. But the next three things, the last three books we're going to look at, they were just me. Like, for instance, this thing. This is in terrible condition, but it was $1. This will not last a reread, but I don't have a really good, sturdy edition of this. This is Literary Essays by Litministration. There's our author on the cover there. This is just a crappy old trade paperback that has lots and lots of periodicals, stuff that he did for periodicals, there's a new book on the letters of J.M. Barrie or a new reconsideration of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Well, okay, your sister or your brother-in-law knows an editor at the TLS. He'll give you 50 bob if you'll write up something. Can I send you this book? I'll send somebody around with it, or maybe I'll come by and you can treat me to a cocktail, and then I'll give you 50 bob if you'll do this. If you just write this up for me. As I've mentioned on this channel, once you start doing that, you keep doing that. It's only the writers who never really made anything of that abandon it. All the ones who did keep doing it until they nail the coffin shut. All of them do. And Strachey did. He never, as far as I know, he never turned down a job. It's been a long time since I had a copy of Michael Holroyd's gigantic biography of Litministration. I keep waiting to find it at the Brattle. It's a tough one to find because when I see it, I usually see it in mass market paperback or trade paperback, and it's 1,200 pages long. So I need to find a hardcover of it or a UK trade paperback, something that's put together so well that I can actually reread it without it falling apart. I haven't done that yet. I am due to reread that book, but I love the way this author writes occasional prose like that. Absolutely love it. This is Litministration, of course, is most famous for Eminent Victorians. He also wrote a really snarky, really readable biography of Queen Victoria. But there was a volume that collected his biographical sketches, and then there's this volume collecting his literary essays, and I love them more than anything. I know that this is going to make me want to read that big fat biography again. I haven't read that in way too long. It was great. It was great. Not only as a big, definitive, no one could ever do a better biography of Litministration, but also a really, really good, knowing, sort of assessment of the Bloomsbury group, of the whole Bloomsbury set. I'm obviously there was a Brattle book that I didn't find today. I saw no copy of that Holroyd biography of Litministration. I wish I had. Then this next one is a Wordsworth classic. I've praised them before, but this one's a hardcover. When I first thought, well, you don't need this at all. But then I thought, no, you don't need any of these. So I grabbed it. This is the return of Sherlock Holmes in a Wordsworth hardcover, not a paperback, that has the lovely Victorian street scene there, and also the original Sidney Paget illustrations with good color resolution, which doesn't always happen. This a lot of times when you get the Sidney Paget illustrations, they will be too dark. Here, the balance has been struck so that they are pretty good. And this is the return of Sherlock Holmes, but it's not just the return of Sherlock Holmes. It's also the Hound of the Baskervilles. So you put together everything that came after Arthur Conan Doyle killed off one of the most famous fictional characters in the history of literature. Got sick of writing about Sherlock Holmes and had him fall to his death in the fatal embrace of Professor Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls, and was excoriated for it by fans. Excoriated. Yelled at in the street. If there's any justice in the world, the apocryphal stories of being pelted with vegetables are also true. Because you don't get to do that. You just don't get to do that. As you know, speaking of Edgar Rice Burroughs, who also wrote one of the most famous fictional characters of all time, if you do that, if that happens to you, it won't be by design. First of all, there's no way that you can predict that. There's no way you can make that happen. But if you do that, you write that for the rest of your life. Okay? And you do it with an effing smile on your face. For God's sake. You don't. Anyway, Burroughs got that. And for a while, Arthur Conan Doyle did not. He was a very, very pig-headed man. And he thought, well, I had a good run, but this is stopping me from more serious writing. So he killed off Sherlock Holmes. And never heard the end of it. Never. Even in his own family. So eventually he decided, well, I'll bring Holmes back, but by telling an earlier story. I will tell the Hound of the Baskervilles. Here's an earlier story. You want a hunger for Sherlock Holmes? I'll give you more Sherlock Holmes, but I'm not going to keep advancing his career because it strikes me as more and more unbelievable to do that. Who cares if it's unbelievable? Who cares if it's unbelievable? If you make a character like this, you keep writing about them. Okay? You don't drop it. Unless you kill them off in the first story, unless that's an organic part of the story, then you keep writing about them. I would be saying the same thing about H.G. Wells if he hadn't killed off the Invisible Man at the end of the book. I would be saying the same thing about Robert Louis Stevenson with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Anyway, the Hound of the Baskervilles did indeed feed a hunger. It scratched an itch. Fans loved it. I love it. As far as I know, David Murphy is the only person I've ever met who didn't like it. But then, eventually, Arthur Conan Doyle just caved in completely and brought his character back in The Adventure of the Empty House, which is, so you've got, this will have the Hound of the Baskervilles at the beginning. There's our villain with his butterfly catching net. This has the Hound of the Baskervilles at the beginning, and then it has The Adventure of the Empty House, where Sherlock Holmes returns. And it's a great scene. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic adventure. The villain is Colonel Sebastian Moran, the second most dangerous man in Europe. It's not a dream, a hoax, an imaginary story. It's not Bobby in the shower, and it's not the Hound of the Baskervilles. It's Sherlock Holmes returning and telling Watson that the way I survived is that I never actually fell to my death. I looked like I did, and then I thought that I should appear to be dead for my own sake, for my own safety's sake, and for yours. But now events have come to the fore, and I need to reveal myself again. And I might add here, I know that I'm preaching to the choir here when I praise the old BBC Granada Sherlock Holmes production with Jeremy Brett, but the first couple of series of that Sherlock Holmes, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, had one actor playing Watson, and then they changed to a different actor. In my opinion, a good change, a very good change. The original Watson in the BBC series is a little bit too much Nigel Bruce. He's a little bit too dumb. Whereas it's a popular misunderstanding of Holmes that thankfully has died a natural death. I don't think anyone would find it acceptable anymore. The story here is not that Sherlock Holmes is a super genius and Watson is stupid. The story here is that Watson is brilliant and Sherlock Holmes is superhuman. That's the key here. But in that BBC production of The Adventure of the Empty House, the scene where Holmes reveals himself is amazing. Jeremy Brett is never better than that. So this will have all of that. This will have all of the adventures that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote after that. And the return of Sherlock Holmes, the volume that was called, the stories that went into that, has some really, really good stuff. The Adventure of the Second Stain is in here. The Adventure of the Dancing Men, which is one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes mysteries. In other words, I don't think that Doyle loses a step at all. I think he went right back in to the character after a few years where he tried to be bigger than the game. It'd be nice if authors didn't do that. But anyway, this is a nice little thing. I don't need it at all. I have so many collected Holmes and so many other things. And then the last thing I got is a biography that I read when it came out. This came out in the late 1970s, I believe. When did you come out? You were such a hit. When did you come out? Let's see. 1977. This is Robert Lacey's biography of Queen Elizabeth II, Majesty. So Elizabeth lived another 50 years after this book. So obviously this is not the book that you want for the whole of her life. A huge number of positive and negative things, her annus horribilis, had yet to happen when this book came out. In other words, the main reason that you're going to want a book like this, the main draw, is going to be that Lacey is such an energetic writer. And he's telling, this is all about not just Queen Elizabeth II, but the whole House of Windsor. So you get everything from Queen Victoria on, and it's all written with such amazing energy and gusto. I don't think I know a more entertaining account of the abdication crisis than the one in this book. It stops, long before we want it to, when you've got such an energetic guide, but it'll keep my appetite nice and satisfied until we get to the massive tsunami of books that I suspect is coming next year, including, inevitably, the authorized biography, which we have never had, of course. I imagine that there will be a 1,000-page authorized biography of Queen Elizabeth II, and I've mentioned on this channel, mainly to the mystification of quite a few of you, that I have a sweet tooth for authorized biographies. I don't know why, because they're practically advertising that they're going to be full of lawyer-vetted lies. But if they're in the right hands, I tend to really enjoy them. For instance, obviously, I'm not looking at this for a life of Queen Elizabeth II, because the half of her reign is not included in here. I'm mainly doing it because it was so enjoyable to read back then, and so enjoyable to read on the parts of her life that are already carved into history. This book made headlines in the 1970s. It sold better than any Queen Elizabeth II biography has ever done, before or since. And it made headlines because of how deeply it delved into practicalities in a way that no earlier Elizabeth II biography had done. How wealthy is this woman? And what kind of power does she actually have? We talk about how she's the figurehead of a constitutional monarchy with no power of her own. Ben Pimlott, in his book about Queen Elizabeth II, says that if Parliament handed her an order for her own execution, she would have to sign it. But I've heard other people weigh in that that's not entirely true, that there are plenty of loopholes here, that the current monarch of the UK has a lot of actual power, a moment that is dramatized in the play King Charles III. But it's still going to be enormous amounts of fun to reread this thing. Really wish. I know this has turned into a video of me lamenting the things I didn't find at the Brattle, but I don't have a copy of Robert Lacey's book, The Kingdom, about Saudi Arabia. That I think it's the best thing he ever did. This is really good, but I like that most of all for just the sense that you get that the author knows that he has an incredible story to tell that's never been told this way before. Whereas that you can't say that about this. You can add shadows here and there. You can say, what kind of money does the Duchy of Cornwall bring in? But you can't. Everything in here has been told before. But his book, The Kingdom, I used to have a mass market paperback of that was solidly made. I don't know what happened to it. I once had a hardcover of it. No idea at all where those things went. But anyway, despite the sound of what I'm saying, I had a wonderful visit to the Brattle. It's not just a parade of things I wish I'd found. Although that's always present when you're going to a shop that stock changes as fast as the Brattle does. So we found Majesty by Robert Lacey, but not The Kingdom by Robert Lacey. Found The Return of Sherlock Holmes in an old Wordsworth hardcover with the Sidney Paget, illustrations, but I did not find any of the other Wordsworth hardcover Sherlock Holmes. I didn't find the whole set. I think there are 4 volumes. And I didn't find any of those. I found the literary essays of Litministration, but I did not find the big fat 1,000-page biography of Litministration. As long as we're going to go through this, I might as well. I found the Penguin Classic of Algernon Blackwood's supernatural stories, some of them. But Algernon Blackwood, if memory serves me correctly, I could ask Michael K. Vaughan, but if memory serves, he had a really terrific-looking mass market paperback back in, I think, the 1970s, and I didn't find that. I want Josie's introduction, so I wouldn't trade this, but I didn't find that. As long as I'm bellyaching about these things. I found Exiles Return, and that is absolutely as much of Malcolm Cowley as I want. Although, even here, there's a ghost of what might have been, because I found no Penguin class or Viking portable libraries today. None. Then we have Dead Certainties by Simon Schama. I did not find any UK trade paperbacks of his multi-volume history of the UK, of England. Could very much have stood to do that. Didn't. I don't want the big, dumb-looking American versions. I want the UK trade paperbacks of those. I found The Captains and the Kings by Taylor Caldwell in this old mass market paperback, but I did not find any of her other great classics. The huge books that she did. Let's see here. Ceremony of the Innocent. What's the one I'm thinking of that's really, really big? The one that really put her on the map. This Side of Innocence, no. Earth is the Lord's, no. Well, I didn't find a mass market paperback of Dear and Glorious Physician. I didn't find any copies at all of Pillar of Iron, her book about Cicero. I just found this. And finally, I found The Efficiency Expert by Edgar Rice Burroughs in this weird mass market paperback. But I did not find Pellucidar, the mass market paperback with the Frank Frazetta cover that Michael K. Vaughan has been showing on his channel. So I guess it was a good trip to the Brattle. I guess. No, actually, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. It's just all those might have beens are just reasons for me to go back. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.